The Rooster Who Couldn't Crow.
A story of pride and humility.
Once upon a time, in a small village nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside, there lived a rooster named Rufus. Rufus was a proud and mighty bird, with a magnificent red comb and a loud and powerful crow that could be heard for miles around. Every morning, just before the sun rose over the horizon, Rufus would stand atop his perch and let out a mighty cock-a-doodle-doo to wake up the entire village. But over time, Rufus became complacent. He started taking his job for granted and began to indulge in leisurely activities. Instead of waking up early, he would sleep in, staying up late nights and chatting with the hens. Spending hours in idle conversation and dozing in the warm sun, he stopped practicing his crowing. Confident that his might was unmatched and he had nothing to prove. One day, Rufus was so tired from chasing after some lady chickens that he fell asleep on a tree branch and completely forgot about his morning duty. As the sun began to rise, the other animals on the farm waited patiently for Rufus' crow, but it never came. The cows started to moo, the pigs started to oink, and even the sheep started to bleat, but Rufus was nowhere to be found. The farmer, who relied on Rufus' crow to start his day, was also confused by the silence. He searched the farm and finally found Rufus snoozing on the tree branch. The farmer was not pleased, and he scolded Rufus for his forgetfulness. Rufus, feeling ashamed, decided to make it up to everyone by waking up early next morning and start his duty as usual. But in the morning, he woke up late as usual and stumbled out of his coop, rubbing his eyes and stretching his wings. As he climbed up to his perch to let out his morning crow, he suddenly realized that he couldn't remember how to do it. Rufus forgot to crow. Yes, you heard that right. He forgot to crow. He tried clearing his throat, fluffing up his feathers, and even jumping up and down a few times. But no matter what he did, he just couldn't seem to remember how to crow. Panicking, Rufus tried to crow, but all that came out was a feeble croak. His crowing became feeble and strained, barely audible. He tried again and again, but nothing worked. He felt embarrassed and ashamed, thinking about how all the animals on the farm would be disappointed in him. But the other animals didn't seem to notice. They went about their morning routines as usual, grazing in the fields and pecking at the ground for food. Feeling hopeless and defeated, Rufus slumped down onto the ground and hung his head in shame. He couldn't believe that he had forgotten how to do the one thing he was supposed to do every day. Just then, he heard a faint cock-a-doodle-doo in the distance. It was the sound of another rooster called Rusty from a neighboring village, whom the villagers replaced for Rufus. Rusty was young and full of energy. Rusty started crowing every morning, and the villagers were amazed by his strength and vigor. They praised Rusty for his mighty crow, and began to forget about Rufus altogether. Rufus started to feel threatened by Rusty. He couldn't stand the thought of someone else taking his place as the village rooster. So, he started crowing louder and more frequently, straining his already weakened voice, but it was no use. Rusty's crow was still louder and more impressive than Rufus's, and the villagers flocked to him every morning. Rufus was left alone on his perch, feeling ashamed and powerless. Rusty had a loud and impressive crow that could be heard for miles around, and soon he became the talk of the town. However, as time passed, Rusty's constant crowing became a headache for the villagers. They couldn't sleep in, and the noise was starting to affect their daily routines. Soon, they began to miss Rufus's reliable and consistent crow. One day, Rufus woke up early and decided to go for a walk around the village. He noticed that the villagers looked tired and grumpy, and he realized how much they missed his morning crow. Rufus knew that he needed to do something to help his friends. Rufus had an epiphany. He realized that he had taken his job and his voice for granted, and that he needed to work hard to regain his former strength. So, he started practicing his crowing once again. He crowed at dawn, at noon, and at dusk, until his voice was stronger and more powerful than ever before. And finally, he woke up early every morning and crowed until his voice was hoarse. He stopped chatting with the hens, or wasting his time on useless things, focused all of his energy on his job as the village rooster. And finally, one morning, Rufus climbed back up onto his perch and let out a mighty cock-a-doodle-doo. The villagers were amazed. They had never heard Rufus's crow so loud and powerful before. They cheered and clapped and welcomed Rufus back as the village rooster. From that day forward, Rufus never took his job for granted again. He woke up early every morning and practiced his crowing, grateful for the opportunity to serve his village once more. The new rooster was no match for Rufus, and he quickly became a distant memory. And the villagers never forgot the lesson they learned, that pride and complacency can lead to downfall, but hard work and dedication can lead to redemption. The moral of the story is that sometimes we take things for granted and don't realize how important they are until they're gone. Rufus learned that his crowing was a vital part of the village's daily routine. And the villagers learned that sometimes it's better to have a reliable and consistent rooster than a flashy and noisy one.